All right, hold on. Let me get this coffee because I need this thingy. Here we are. Let's do this. All right. Look at this. Now let's taste this Danny Segura. You know, the cafetero back here. Let's see what he came up with. I won't die. That's about the review I'd give that. All right. Let's get into it. So, there were a series of events that happened, I think, on Friday and Saturday. Again, some in the boxing world. We don't have time to get to that, but if you didn't pay attention, boxing had a pretty good weekend. MMA did too. There were a lot of great UFC debuts that happened. There were some great wins, some great fights, but there were some setbacks as well. I want to talk about those setbacks today. I want to examine what they mean. Now, let me tell you what the purpose of this segment is. Why do I do the Monday Morning Analyst? Because I would like to showcase fighters who do really well and ideas that are important in combat sports. It's really a celebration of the good side and an examination of the important. I don't really want to spend my time badgering fighters about why they lost, but the reality is of analysis, at certain points, you come to a position where you have to be critical. And that makes nobody happy. I don't take pleasure in doing it. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that I can call up the fighters I'm about to critique and say, you should take my advice, I have the best ideas imaginable. It's not what I'm saying, but I do have a responsibility to the truth and to you guys in the audience to look at the tape and determine what it says. And I found 3 different fighters who had kind of 3 similar but very different problems at the same time. That being Sage Northcutt, who had a rough debut, to put it mildly, over in 1. Meegan Anderson had a bit of a setback in the UFC this weekend. And then Kevin Lee in the main event of UFC Rochester. Now, they have 3 sort of separate reasons for why that happened. This is the reality about prospecting in sports, and then especially in MMA. It is very, very difficult to do. It is hard to figure out who's going to be good and who is not, right? Because certain fighters come to the sport at certain ages. Some come with certain advanced backgrounds, some don't. Some could be good, but they train with the wrong team, or they don't have the right approach. Some get sick, some get injured, some don't manage it properly. There are a lot of factors that can make somebody who looks really good early ultimately not necessarily pan out. Now, I want to be clear about this. In the case of Sage, and in the case of Meegan, and in the case of Kevin, it would be very foolish to suggest that these losses tell us that this is the end game for all of them. Far from it. In fact, what you're going to notice from all of these is how correctable the problems are. So in the end, what this really is about is a silver lining. I'm not equipped to give them life or professional or career advice. I am somewhat capable of looking at the video and diagnosing perhaps some commonalities that contributed to defeats. But in the end, when someone stumbles like this, you have to understand first of all, it's hard to be good at MMA, and it's hard to advance. It's just very, very difficult. It's a very difficult sport to do really well in, even if they start with great athletics and they're very young and blah, blah, blah. This is the one thing you should consider when you're talking about prospects. Number one, you don't want to count them out too early because they can peak at different times when they really begin to put things together. Number two, the best fighters are the ones that don't rely on the institutions to help them. In other words, this is an extreme example, but it's just the one you should understand it because it's the clearest one. Think about John Jones when he first came to the UFC, or pick your favorite super elite fighter, Cain Velasquez or something early on, right? What did you notice about that? That it almost didn't matter who they were given. It almost didn't matter the type of opponent. It almost didn't matter the place on the card. It almost didn't matter the kind of card. They just took care of business. In other words, what you want from a promoter is somebody who can scout and identify talent, recruit them, sign them, keep them, and then nurture them. But that nurturing process is very inexact. Part of it is they don't know how good somebody is. Part of it is they can misidentify it. Part of it is they can get the matchmaking wrong. I think the matchmaking was bad in the case of Sage. And the ones who just advance past all of it are the ones where, yes, the institution, whether it's the UFC or Bellator or ONE, even if they do them some favors, they were going to succeed almost no matter what. Doesn't mean win every time, but it means that they can kind of figure out their training for themselves, where to train for themselves, how to train for themselves, a sober assessment about their own limitations, an understanding of their own skills, what the weight class should be, how to handle media. The ones who can kind of figure that out without having their hand held a lot, those are the ones that are going to be the most obvious success stories. Everyone else, it's just hard to figure out, okay? That's what I want you to keep in mind here. I don't blame any of these organizations for getting behind these guys, and I still maintain, certainly in the case of Kevin Lee, I do believe he is championship caliber. Meegan Anderson, jury's still out. Sage, jury's still out, okay? Although Sage is in a bit of a different position than Meegan, I would even say. But all right, with that out of the way, let's go to the slides here. Okay, understanding what we're looking at here is kind of important. What can we say about what happened with Sage and with Cosmo? This one is on one a little bit. Now, you could say, oh, one shouldn't be doing him any favors. If that's your worldview, that's fine. To me, when you've got a guy who was, 11-2 coming in or so, 11-3 coming in, something like that, and clearly was still in the very developmental stage of his game, giving him somebody the level of Cosmo Alexandre was probably not a good idea. Alexandre, if you're not familiar with him, is a very good kickboxer. As I noted on my personal YouTube channel, has 3 victories over John Wayne Parr, multiple-time world Muay Thai champion. He had a great run in Bellator years ago. In MMA, had some time off, but nevertheless, just a very, very decorated kickboxer, experienced, tons of experience. Sage doesn't have that, and in particular, he just had I think he has a better style for MMA. So they didn't do him any favors here. I think that was a mistake, and I don't blame that on Sage. I kind of put that blame on one a little bit. But beyond that, here is where you could put some blame on him. Like, where did he fall short a little bit? Blame is the word I'm using here in quotes. Where did he fall short? He and his team should have had some assessment about what the differential was here in the striking department, and maybe he intended to wrestle and thought he would have more time. And so in that case, there's not much you could say, but if they should have known, they would have had to wrestle a lot in this contest, a lot. I don't think he has the best takedown defense, and that would have been his best opportunity. I think his takedowns have gotten a lot better. He should have relied on them, because what happens is just a tragedy. All right, so here we are. So you see Cosmo. I want to point out something here. First of all, he's constantly using lateral movement, and look at this here. He just kind of steps around this kick, right? Whoop, just kind of parries it out a little bit. Gets hit a little bit, so it's not a total duck and dodge, but he just kind of got around it pretty easily. So they move along here, right? And I want you to pay attention to this. This is the big one. This movement here by Cosmo, where he drops his right hand and pretends like he's going to kick, he is getting reactions out of Sage. Number one, that's the first thing he's doing. And you know, Sage brings the hands up a lot, That's one value to this kind of fake. The other one is this. He's corralling him, as you notice. Look here. His motion is this way, right? His motion is to push him in the direction of this right hand, because I think he saw that the right hand here was low of Sage. So what he does is he pushes him in that direction. Now watch this skip again, this fake rather, right? Pushing him. Look at him turning him, pushing him into the right hand that he wants. Sage kind of moving in and out. That's good. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. And here comes that fake again. Now notice it brings the hands up of Sage, but notice what it also does. It drives him backwards, which was completely intentional. One, and then he does it again. Now look where they are. Sage is right up against the ropes, man. That was completely intentional. This alarm bell should have been going off right here. All right, number one. Beyond that, you'll notice he's now cage cutting. He steps in hard. Sage has nowhere to go except to these sides, which is fine if you have really good evasive lateral movement. But against an experienced guy who's not going to come this way, he's going to come this way, right? He's going to cut you off at an angle. So what happens is he cuts him off here like this, stops him. And as he does, I want you to pay attention. He actually moves closer. He shortens this distance here a little bit as he does that. Steps in. Now Sage has nowhere to go because he doesn't want to get cracked here. So he paws out to kind of establish distance, work some space. Alexandre actually gives him a bit of an exit by curling this way, making him think that there's going to be space here. And as he does that, he's going to walk this direction into him, right? Steps forward. One more, plants. And I want you to notice something. Catches Sage on the half beat. How often do we talk about fighters who are good strikers catching fighters on the half beat? Understand something about this right hand. That's the first time he threw a punch the entire fight. He didn't throw this right hand 50 times and then finally it worked. This was the first punch he threw. This is the very first one. And so the reason why it worked is because the hand was out. He had corralled him into that space. So Sage was moving this direction. He had his hand out, so he knew he could time it. And he just timed it perfectly by catching him before his foot can even land. So he's not even balanced in a point where he could potentially take it and roll with it. He caught him at the optimal time, and boom, it just crushed him. Look at this. Bow, foot in the air. I mean, it's just, I don't know what to tell you. This was not a fair fight in this particular realm. There should have been some kind of development in the strategy to have this be a little bit more of a wrestling-centric kind of fight. And I know it's in a ring, which wouldn't necessarily do him any favors, but these are questions that you have to ask when the fight is being made about what conditions it's going to be established under. And I think that they probably thought that this was going to be even on the feet. I don't know. I didn't really give it much consideration ahead of time, but in the end, you can see this is really bad. And I saw people making the wrong claim about Sage, like, oh, he's got a weak chin. Yo, look at this shot, man, in real time. Look at this shot. Pow. Ladies and gentlemen, that would put down a water buffalo. If you think that that is evidence that he has a weak chin, you are very mistaken. That is not what that says at all. Now, maybe you want to point to other fights that say that. That punch broke his face in 8 places. 8 places. All of this got shattered. That was a thunderous punch from a guy who used all kinds of veteran tricks to back an opponent up, corral him into space, and take advantage of a defensive liability, and to do so in about 29 seconds. That's the story here. The story is not that he has a weak chin. So when you look at this in your Sage, what can you say? You can say, well, look, this was too much too fast on the feet. This was not an appropriate fight at this juncture in his career. Probably could have done a little bit better if there had been wrestling. Probably would have been a little bit better if there had been a cage. The point being is there's still some developmental things that need to happen. This was just a little bit too much too soon. Let's put the thumbnail up, please. All right, so that out of the way. Let's jump to another fighter that had some difficulties this weekend, who, again, I think very highly of. I think this fighter is still very much great potential. I don't say this as somebody who can roll up to their gym and be like, you should listen to me. I have great career advice. All I'm going to do is look at the tape and see what it tells us. In the case of Sage, he just got completely overwhelmed super fast. It was a bad matchup, bad style matchup, bad experience matchup. They shouldn't have been in a ring. There's just a lot of things. There was, from soup to nuts, there should have been a lot more of a considered effort and approach to how that fight, his one debut, should have been made. This is a little bit different, although in some ways there are some overlap. You can go to the slides here if you can, please. This was Meegan Anderson taking on Felicia Spencer. First of all, Felicia Spencer is a black belt. Let me just be clear about this. If you've never been less than a black belt, and then you roll with a black belt, it's the most confusing thing in the world, because you get attacked from angles and grips and setups that you've either never seen, or you can answer one but not the other, or it's bewildering. For me, this was a question about defensive choices that were ultimately made. So eventually Felicia Spencer gets here, and what do we have? Meegan Anderson doing a lot of right things. She's spreading her base apart. She has the overhook here, and then is working on wrist control. So a lot of this looks pretty good. On the other hand, Felicia Spencer has the inside head position and is trying to make something of this. So let's sort of see what happens here, and maybe we can derive some lessons. She's going to work her way in the inside, right? And then what's she going to do? She's trying to control the bicep, and you see them fighting for grip here, right? Who's going to control what? You don't want to let someone control your wrists. Bad things can happen there. I find this one kind of interesting. So here is what Felicia Spencer does. She does something called a sacrifice throw. A sacrifice throw is any time you go for a throw and you have to go to your own back to make it happen. And the reason why they call it a sacrifice throw is you might be sacrificing good position or ultimately the thing you're looking for, because it's very, very difficult to pull off, or there's just a lot of risk involved if things don't go right. So what she does is she underhooks this leg at hold on. She underhooks, Felicia Spencer does, this leg, and then is just going to roll through off of her back, right? So let's take a look at that. So she's going to, rather than hand fighting constantly, She digs a hand under here, and then she's going to, with this foot, step through, and then hips are going to twist around, yeah? So she does exactly that. And look at that. So here's your underhook of the leg, and she's going to take her weight, bring it forward and in a circle, so that way she can come back around. All right? Clear this off. So she does that, brings the weight. She's going to use this hook and this hook here to push her forward, right? Doesn't quite go to plan here because Meegan gets her base and then tries and stays back. If I was Anderson, and again, I'm not in a position to say anything, like these are all better fighters and better martial artists than I could ever be. But one of the issues with Anderson here that I've sort of detected, at least in the tape in this particular fight, is either a defensive choice problem or a inability to continue wrestling. You'll hear Daniel Cormier talking about it a lot. Keep wrestling, keep wrestling, keep wrestling. What they mean is if two people are relatively equally skilled, maybe there's a slight differential, better, different kinds of things, but they're more or less the same kind of wrestler. Eventually what happens is in a scramble, someone kind of takes a breather for just a second. I'm not talking like a hands on the hips kind of thing. I'm talking like just plants a hand when they're not supposed to, or stands up when they're not supposed to, or just something. They kind of stop wrestling. If you stop wrestling and the other person doesn't, they're going to win 100 times out of 100. You get a little bit of that here, but that can also be in part because of a lack of clarity about which direction to go. So she comes back for a second, and then you'll see Spencer turn the corner. She's going to grab this far leg from Meegan and then drive her into her, right? And this is great. People think doubles are straight back. They can be if you're Jordan Burroughs, but most of the time doubles go one direction or the other. You actually turn at an angle, and that's what she does here. Head up, drives at an angle like this. Okay, so now she has the back. Now, not with the hooks in, but you can see who kept wrestling, who kept driving through. Felicia Spencer. So now she comes up and then uses this arm as a placeholder. Students of jiu-jitsu, that's how you do it. You put the arm in first, the arm holds the spot, and then when the leg comes in, then the arm goes free, like that. People don't know that trick a lot. Putting the arm in there, then the leg, then the arm comes out. You're replacing things in jiu-jitsu all the time, right? So here is when, again, there's just not, like, rather than planting the weight like this, again, this is a difficult fight. You're fighting a black belt. Like, it's not easy. But there's not this continued effort at wrestling. Again, partly from, I think, a lack of defensive choice clarity. So here she's fallen up high. And Anderson, you're going to see, is going to grab and pull. But because both hooks are in, they're going to go over. If she had cleared one hook, or one of the big things here that I noticed was a lot of times people will plant their hands on the mat. If you plant your head, now your hands are free. Neither of those things happen, because if you can plant your head and then you pull on their head, you can shimmy a hook off, or you can raise a leg up and kick through, and that way you can shimmy a hook off. There's lots of different opportunities there for success. You see her grab the head, but the problem is she may have only one hook. Let me see here. Even with the one hook, it's fine. Well, she had either one hook or she put one in transition. It's hard to tell from this angle, but certainly by here you can see both hooks are in. It doesn't matter. That was the same thing that Holly Holm did to Miesha Tate. Miesha had the choke from the back. Holly tried to roll, but because she had controlled the hips with the hooks, she went right over with her. You got to clear one of those or both of those. And if you're going to clear one, you have to kind of go to a side. So anyway, now we're here. You can put the thumbnail up. Now, actually, here's a pretty good part. Here, Meegan Anderson does a really good job of defending the choke in that position. You're like, oh, look, you're not going to show that part. It's just not relevant to the particular part of the conversation. But eventually what happens is Spencer realizes she's not going to get the choke in this position. It's just not going to work. So she decides to bail on it because it's not going anywhere, because Meegan does a really good job at defending. And Spencer decides to get on top. Now you can go back. So here we are. Now she's on top. Now this is a terrible position. By the way, the same kick-out tool is available here if you can get it. The worst thing you can do is be flat on your back or flat on your stomach. You always want to be on a side if at all possible. And there's ways to do this. By the way, this is just awesome control too from a very experienced black belt. Like, she's got good hand control all the time. Her hips are in line with her other opponent's hips. She's grapevining at certain times. Like, also, there's just not a lot you can do about that. Let's just be clear about it too, right? So here we are. Anderson does the right thing, tries to get to a hip, tries to hip escape. And here it becomes a hand fighting issue, all right? I want to point this out. So here is where we are. Let me just get a point here to stop. I want to show this. Okay, this is your choking arm in almost every circumstance. But when you have a black belt on your back, one arm is going to be under the armpit, one arm is going to be over the shoulder. When you have this, this is your choking arm, yeah? In the case of the choking arm, they're rarely ever just going to fight you, and whatever the first choking arm that comes over is the one that's going to last. What typically is going to happen is they're going to switch side to side. They're going to go under one arm and over the shoulder, then they're going to switch all the time, and they're going to have all different kinds of tricks to get there, which, by the way, Felicia Spencer does. Like, it's a very difficult position to be in. So here's what happens. Felicia Spencer comes over the top. You can see her kind of straightening out this leg because she doesn't want Meegan to be able to post on it. Here's one thing I would have done. Again, I shouldn't say that because I can't do shit. But here's one thing that the tape shows. There's no hook that I can tell right here. I think I'm going to make an argument that standing on this foot would have been essential. It's going to be a lot harder if the gravitational pull and the weight is so much more forward. Here, look at her hips. They're kind of level-ish with the ground. Not totally, but pretty close. As long as that's the case, she's well balanced. You have to disrupt that balance. You got to get your base in the air. When your base is in the air, that opens up all the other possibilities, okay? So here's the issue. So you can see what happens here is, and this is why I think this is an issue about defensive choice work. What you see with Anderson, no matter what side it is she's planting a hand here and then using one hand to defend. So that automatically puts her at a disadvantage and it gives her opponent everything she needs, rather than posting off the head, rather than posting off the head and then hand fighting with two hands. Here's another argument that I would make. It's always better to be on your base. Okay. It's almost always better to be on your base than not. But the one thing I would say is, in this particular case, some people, through their development, it could be uneven. And I have seen people who have better mat escapes than they do standing from back. If that's the case, while I would not necessarily say that I see a lot of UFC fighters giving up base to roll to their back, think about BJ Penn in his prime. When he slapped that choke on you, he's snatching you off your base at the exact same time because he has more control. But if your defense is better in certain circumstances, or you feel more comfortable in certain circumstances, there can be a case to be made, especially in a dire consequence, that's worth pursuing. But generally, it's better to have your base in the air. But this is nowhere because the hand is now occupied. So this hand is no good other than to hold your opponent's weight. That has to go away. You got to roll through. You got to get on your head. You got to do something because this is no good, right? And so you're going to see, here's the choking arm, right? She's pounding away on it while this is that hand right here. Look closely. That is the left hand of Spencer. She's holding wrist control, near side wrist control, a la Habib, right? And she plants a little bit because she doesn't want to lose the back, grabs it again, right? And here's the other part. Anderson has to find a way to get this elbow to the inside of the ribs. Right now it's on the outside. It's easier said than done. But if you had the one hand here, which is correct, and you could not plant this hand and you could address it here, it'd be a lot easier, in my judgment, to find a way to get to the inside. You might end up on your back again, and they're on top, and that's not a great place to be, but it's better than this scenario. Again, you can't just explode from back to like, now we're here. Sometimes you got to build towards things, right? So you can see this is your choking arm, and she's controlling the other hand here. Not a good space to be in. What's going to happen is that's going to switch. You're going to watch this here, and she's grapevining here to prevent Anderson from establishing any real base here either. Although I still think right here you probably could have stood, especially with now the left hand taking the place here with the left knee. Now you just drive up a little bit. It feels not great, but you've only got a hook and a choking arm on the same side. This is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity. So here we go. She's going to drag her leg back a little bit here. She's going to readjust, right? Boom, boom, boom. She's planting. She's doing this because she wants to switch hands. Now, Meegan does this, and I love this. This is correct, right? Look at this. She's going to plant on her head here, but then she goes back to the knee. That, I think, was a mistake, in as much as I'm able to diagnose one. That was, I think, the point where if you'd stayed up here, right there, boom. Look at that. Now, look, compare her hips before. Now her hips, this is Spencer's, are facing this way as opposed to this way. Now gravity works in your favor, and she doesn't even have this hook. It's like that was a chance. That was an opportunity right there. You got to keep wrestling. You got to keep moving. Easier said than done, too, by the way. It's very easy to do what I'm doing. It's very hard to do what they're doing. In any event, by the way, hooking the fence here, that's a no-no. No one caught that, all right? So now she's lost the choking arm. Let's see what happens. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. Anderson's still on that hand. As long as that hand is down, there's no defensive opportunity there. Being against the fence helps, but it's occupied, right? Boom, 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 boom. We got to move here kind of quickly. Now look here. Eventually what happens is, look here. So you see, here's Felicia Spencer's hand. She pulls it out, the left one, right? Punching through. There's nothing defending here because this hand is down. She yanks it out and then drives through like that. Once you got here, what does this look like? This looks like the first Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz fight. Nate had a hand through and he couldn't get it through all the way, so he punched, then it slid through, and then he wrapped it up. Once you're here, it is full-on alarm, 2 hands on this thing. Their hand is now past your throat. That is, whatever else you're doing has to stop. And even if it means getting punched in the face a little bit and rolling through something. You got to do something. You can't, no good will happen here. So you got to move. So in any event, she comes through and just does the exact same thing Conor does. Now she leans. Now she has 2 hooks. She's going to break down the posture. She goes back in again, right? She's going to fight right there. And now it's just a matter of just sinking the choke. Okay, put the slide up here. You get the idea. So to me, there were, in Sage's case, it was an overwhelming amount of just, I think, that was just not the fight to take in the circumstance to take it. This one could have gone a little bit differently, but for some skill development issues in grappling exchanges. That gets us to the last one of the week. And it's this. You can put this back up. Kevin Lee taking on Rafael dos Anjos, and we'll end here. His issue in this particular fight, and I think his career generally, in as much as I'm capable of diagnosing such a thing, is completely different than the other two. He is an elite fighter, and I still maintain, people are going to be like, people love to hate on Kevin Lee, and I get that. I still maintain he is a championship caliber fighter. What I think the issue is for me is that his strategic approach doesn't match what his skill set allows for, which is sort of true generally, but at a much more higher level. These are the stats from the fight over the weekend. Here's what it says, and I want you to pay attention to something. These are the takedowns. So Dos Anjos on top, Lee on bottom. Okay, Lee got 6. Oh, God damn it. Lee got 6 of 16 takedowns. Not a high percentage. He's around 42% overall. And you could say, well, Khabib is also around 48%. There's a difference we'll look at in just a moment. You got 4 out of 7 for Kevin Lee. So number one, there's not enough efficiency with the offensive wrestling, and there's a little too much liability with the defensive one. But that's really not the issue. This is what I want you to pay attention to. Oops, hang on. It's this. The strike totals. Again, Dos Anjos on top, Lee on bottom. These are overall. So these are total strikes here, significant strikes here. Look at these numbers, 14, 15, 2, and 9. The key to understanding Kamaru Usman and Khabib Nurmagomedov is that their styles are not efficient as finishers. They score some finishes, but they're not very efficient for that. In fact, they're not very efficient at all. They're really labor intensive. You have to have unbelievable cardio matched with lights out takedown ability, matched with the ability to hold somebody down. And you have to have all 3 of those working in concert together. If any piece of the triangle is missing a leg, then there is no triangle. There's nothing sturdy to hold it up anymore. That, to me, seemed to be Kevin Lee's problem in this particular context. Look at these totals. There's just not a lot going on, and you could say he got the takedowns. Okay, but one second here. Keep in mind these numbers. This is Khabib Nurmagomedov taking on Conor McGregor. Again, Nurmagomedov on top, McGregor on bottom. Look at these instead. 18 total strikes, 58 in the second, 17 in the third, and just 11 in the fourth. But the difference is he got the submission there. So what can that tell you? By the way, look at some of these takedown totals. 1 of 2, 1 of 1, 0 of 3, 1 of 1. Not nearly as many takedowns. You know why? Because once he gets them, chances are you ain't getting back up. Look at this for just a second as I talk through this. I'm just going to play this in real time. This is Kevin Lee on one of his first major takedown attempts in the first round. Just listen to me as I talk this through. Look at how much effort he has to put into this without securing it and without doing any damage in between. When Khabib Nurmagomedov gets a hold of you, he may not get you on the first one, but number one, he can chain things together. Number two, remember what makes Khabib special. He can go for a double, switch to a single, all wrestling techniques. Then he can get a halfway position, 50-50, clip your elbow to his and take you for a ride, meaning he has strong takedown ability from neutral positions. More than that, he has a judo and sambo background. So he can go from a folk-style takedown and then switch into a trip, upper and lower body being mixed all the time, so that you're having to answer for a series of problems in a number of different planes that other fighters just can't do. Notice you don't see hardly any of that here. If you want to have a style where you're takedown heavy, that's okay. And I do think he's got great takedowns. But to me, what's missing here is even when he gets it, he can't really hold it. There's not a lot to be gained from it, and it takes a long time. Look at this. This is still the first takedown we're going for here. There's just not enough tools in the tool belt to merit this kind of strategic approach to the game at this level. Down several levels, he can just lord his skills over everybody. But to me, what these people have in common at various different levels, because there's Sage, and then I say Meegan, and then Kevin at the top, which is why I put them in that space to begin with. Kevin is super elite. I have such respect for Kevin Lee as an athlete. But to me, I think his team needs to rethink some of these strategies. He needs more time on the feet to hurt people, and he needs a better strategy for takedowns and a more complete array of opportunities and skills to hold someone down or at least do damage while he's there. Khabib has all of those, and he still can't finish guys. Imagine not having certain of those pieces and trying a very similar style. We're still on the first takedown here. We're still on the first takedown. Look at this. It's crazy. It's crazy to think that this is the thing that he was trying to do. And he switches from, look, he's trying to go single leg here on the inside. You see the same Kimura grip. He rips it off. And then they finally separate. Look at how long that took. It's just, you can put the thumbnail up. It's just not a style that can really work. You got to have the right tools in place. So to me, what these fighters could conceivably consider doing, because I can't tell anybody what to do, we push people too fast. All those fighters, I think, are in their 20s. Maybe Meegan's 30, but they're all in their 20s or pretty close to it for the most part. To me, rather than taking fight after fight after fight after fight, hitting the pause button and working on some of those skills, then when, in the case of Sage, when you're taking a fight, being a little bit more deliberate about the choices you make. In the case of Meegan, there's a little bit less of that because you have to just deal with what you got at 145. But in the case of Kevin Lee, having a slightly more strategic approach, I think in the end could produce great dividends. It is by no means a foregone conclusion that this is the peak of their abilities. It's also not a foregone conclusion that all these things can just be fixed overnight. In fact, they probably can't be. They're all correctable mistakes and they're all correctable errors. But this is tough business. And having some honest evaluation about what's going right and what's going wrong will take you a very long way. Don't count these fighters out yet, but understand the challenges that they face. And that is the Monday Morning Analyst.